In this lesson, you'll learn how to select specific columns from a table, and also how to manage the names of the columns as they're returned. This query should be familiar by now. It means to select all of the data from the country table. So when we press go, we'll see all of the rows and all of the columns from the country table in the world database. Here we've selected the world database up here in our database selector. But what if we just want to see a list of countries and their life expectancies? All this data is confusing. Well, it's not exactly like a needle in a haystack, but you get the idea. There's the name column, and then life expectancy. It's over here someplace. There we go. And there's a lot of data that we're not using. And if we're using this query in a programmatic context, as opposed to just displaying it on the screen, if it were in a program that we're writing, we'd be carrying around all of this data and using resources for no purpose, wasting those resources in effect. So it would be useful to be able to select which columns to return in the query. So instead of the asterisk, which you'll remember means everything, all of the rows and all of the columns, we can just select the particular columns that we're looking for by putting their names in the select clause instead of the asterisks. So I'm going to type here name and life expectancy, comma. And then when I run the query, we'll get just those two columns. And there you go. We now have the name column and the life expectancy column and nothing else. So we're not wasting any space in memory or in whatever resources we're using in a programmatic context. And we don't have to hunt for it with our eyes on the screen. We have just the columns that it is that we're looking for. The column headings are taken from the names of the columns as they're in the database and as we specified them in the select statement. So we have name and we have life expectancy up here in the select statement, and down here in the results there's the name of the columns and they're the same. What if we wanted to name them something else? Instead of name, country might be a useful heading for this one, so we use the as clause, as country. And over here, instead of life expectancy, we might want to have it in a readable form, like with a space. So we say as life expectancy. You'll notice that I put quotes around the word life expectancy. We used these before for a literal string, and in this context they're necessary because otherwise that space would tell the SQL system that the as clause is over. So what this does is it takes these two words and it makes them into one token. In computer languages, a token is a part of speech when you're speaking in a human language. That would be a token in a computer language. And so tokens typically are terminated by what they call white space, which would be the space character here, or a carriage return, or a tab, or something like that. And so when the parser sees the space, it thinks the token is over and it would get confused. Let's go ahead and run it with the quotes and without the quotes so that you can see what happens. When I run it with the quotes like this, we get life expectancy here, and now the heading of this column is country because we named it country over here. So we have name as country, life expectancy as life expectancy with a space. Now if we take out the quote marks, we can create an error. Sometimes it's very useful to create errors on purpose. You can learn from this what the error messages look like so that later when you see those error messages and you're not expecting them, you get an idea of what to look for in your code so that you know how to fix it easier without having to spend a lot of time trying to figure it out. So let's go ahead and create this error on purpose. And now instead of the happy green message that said how many rows and columns we got back, we have a red error message. And it says, you have an error in your SQL syntax. Check the manual that corresponds with your MySQL server. So we're using the MySQL server here. And this is a message from the MySQL server that says that it had a problem with the way that we put this query to it. And it says near expectancy from country at line 1. Well, we only have the one line, so that's easy to find. And expectancy is right here. So that's where it got confused. Everything up to that point made perfect sense. Select name as country, life expectancy as life, and then the word expectancy confused it because it doesn't speak English, it speaks SQL. And at that point, the token for the alias for life expectancy is life, and then it's expecting something else here instead of this word expectancy. If we had put just the from there, it would have been fine. But if we want it to take all of this with the space as one token, we'll put in these quote marks, single quotes, SQL likes single quotes. Just as a note here, a lot of SQL servers, including MySQL, are perfectly fine with double quotes, but some are not. Single quotes are correct for SQL, and you'll find that some SQL servers, in particular Microsoft SQL Server, don't like the double quotes. So just always use the single quotes and you'll be happy when you're writing SQL. Now when we press go, we'll get what we expect, the two columns, country, because it's named country here, which is the name column out of the database, named country, and life expectancy, which we have over here, just like we expected. The ability to select which columns to read with a query is key. A simple query that uses column names in the select clause allows you to select which columns to read with your query, and use of the as clause allows you to display those columns with a more readable heading.